Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Donald Trump announces universal 10% tariffs on all imports to the United States that will go into effect on April the 5th. Certain countries will be hit with steeper tariffs based on US trade deficits. Leaders from across the globe widely express growing concerns over Trump's soon-to-be-imposed trade levies. Those who publicly share their objections include leaders from China, the European Union, Australia and Canada, as fears of a global trade war loom. Myanmar's earthquake death toll passes 3,000 people as hospitals overflow and medicines shortages alarm relief groups. Meanwhile, the isolated junta leader could gain legitimacy for seized government with a trip to a Thai regional summit. United States airstrikes continue against Yemen's Houthis in the Sada region of Yemen. The Iran-backed group states that over 20 pre-dawn strikes this morning reportedly claim at least one fatality in the area. Washington has not responded to these accusations. Hungary declares its intention to exit from the International Criminal Court as the nation greets court fugitive Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister arrives in Budapest on European soil for the first time since the arrest warrant was issued. The Israeli Defense Force reports it is investigating an Israeli strike that claimed 15 emergency workers in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military indicates its troops fired upon the ambulances because those vehicles appeared to move suspiciously. Gunfire erupts as thousands of people continue to clash with police in Haiti, demanding action against gang violence in the country. At least a dozen heavily armed demonstrators opened fire on officers outside the Prime Minister's offices today. Israeli military aircraft strike Damascus and Hama, says the official Israeli army and local media. Sana reports that the strikes target the research facility in Barzeh. These raids represent the latest in a series of attacks on the war-torn country. Starting off with the biggest news of the day, Donald Trump has launched his most aggressive trade action yet, imposing a 10% baseline tariff on all US imports and higher rates on countries he accuses of unfair trade practices. India faces a 26% duty, while China will see a total levy of 54%. The European Union is hit with a 20% tariff, Japan with 24%, and Vietnam with 45%. Cambodia and others even face steeper penalties. The move marks the most significant shift in global trade rules in 75 years, which Trump calls Liberation Day for the United States. In response to the tariffs, stock markets have plunged. European markets opened lower today, while Japan's Nikkei 225 collapsed over 4%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped 2.4%. United States stock futures also suffered, with the dollar down by 1.1% against a basket of foreign currencies like the pound and the yen, which strengthened. Safe haven assets like gold surged to record highs of around $3,100 overnight as investors scrambled for safety. Analysts warn that these tariffs could trigger inflation, slow global growth, and push multiple economies into recession. While Canada and Mexico are spared from these tariffs, other key trade partners are bracing for impact. Trump declared the move an act of economic independence, but critics call it a nuclear bomb on global trade. The US Treasury has warned foreign governments against retaliating, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stating that any countermeasures would escalate tensions further, increasing the risk of a prolonged and destabilizing trade war. Let's listen to what Trump had to say about the whole matter.
But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that. I'd like to see if you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some.
China, the EU, India, Canada, Thailand and Japan have all reacted to Trump's tariff policies. China stated it is maintaining communications with the United States on economic and trade issues following the announcement of these new tariffs. The Chinese government warned that protectionism offers no solution and urged the United States to resolve trade differences through fair consultations. Beijing emphasized the need for the United States to correct its wrong practices in trade. This is what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson had to say.
正如我刚才回应的，贸易战、关税战没有赢家，保护主义没有出路。现在美方需要做的是纠正错误做法，以平等、尊重、互惠的方式，同包括中国在内的世界各国通过磋商解决经贸分歧。
Meanwhile, UK Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds announced plans to negotiate a trade deal to mitigate the impact of Trump's 10% tariffs on British goods. The goal is to reduce economic strain caused by the tariffs. In Europe again, Germany Chancellor Olaf Scholz criticised the new US tariffs, calling them fundamentally wrong and an attack on the global trade order. He emphasised that this trade order had contributed to global prosperity largely due to American efforts. However, Scholz stated that Europe remains open to further talks to resolve the escalating trade conflict. Listen in to what he had to say.
Zu sagen. Die jüngsten Zollentscheidungen des US-Präsidenten halte ich für grundfalsch. Das ist ein Anschlag auf eine Handelsordnung, die Wohlstand überall auf dem Globus geschaffen hat. Eine Handelsordnung, die ganz wesentlich auch das Ergebnis amerikanischer Bemühungen ist.
Meanwhile, French Prime Minister François Bayrou also criticised the new tariffs, calling them a catastrophe for both Europe and the United States. He stated that the decision creates immense economic difficulties for both regions. Let's hear what the French Prime Minister had to say.
Cette décision est une catastrophe pour le monde de l'économie. C'est une immense difficulté pour l'Europe. Je crois que c'est aussi une catastrophe pour les États-Unis et pour les citoyens américains. L'idée que chaque des grandes régions du monde va se refermer sur elle-même et que la guerre commerciale doit être désormais la règle, cette idée présente des dangers qui vont, hélas, se réaliser.
Thailand's Prime Minister Shinawatra Paetongtarn said the country has a strong plan to manage the 36% US tariffs and hopes to negotiate a reduction. The government aims to mitigate the impact of the new levies on its economy. Here's what Thailand's Prime Minister said.
แต่ว่ามาตรการต่างๆเตรียมไว้แล้วค่ะแล้วก็มีมาตรการเตรียมที่แก้ไขปัญหาเบื้องต้นแล้วก็มาตรการในการคุยกันต่อด้วยว่ายังไงจริงแล้วเนี่ยมันได้บ้างนะคะแต่ว่าในรายละเอียดมีคุยกันแล้วเมื่อเช้าด้วยแล้วก็จริงๆเราเตรียมมาสักพักแล้วที่บอกว่าตั้งคณะทำงานนะคะเพราะฉะนั้นก็ไม่ต้องห่วงในเรื่องนี้เพราะว่ามีหลายสเต็ปที่เราเตรียมไว้ค่ะ
European politicians and a German industry group criticised US tariffs announced by President Trump, calling for a measured response. The UK hopes its economic deal with the US will reduce the impact of the 10% tariff. The EU, facing a 20% tariff, aims for a proportionate response to protect its businesses and citizens. Here's what Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, has said.
Announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe, also for the most vulnerable countries, which are now subject to some of the highest US tariffs.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recognised that Trump uphold key aspects of the US-Canada relationship. However, he noted that the 25% tariffs imposed over fentanyl concerns are still in place. A senior Indian government official stated that the Commerce Ministry is assessing the impact of US tariffs. They described the situation as a mixed bag, suggesting both positive and negative effects. The official emphasised that it should not be seen as a major setback for India. Taiwan's cabinet criticised the 32% tariffs as very unreasonable and vowed to address the issue with the US government. The move reflects Taiwan's opposition to the tariffs imposed by the US. We will see if the nations implement any countermeasures as the situation develops, potentially reshaping global trade strategies in the process. We move to the Middle East now, where Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz on Thursday warned Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shara that he would face severe consequences if Israel's security was threatened. I warn Syrian leader Jalani, if you allow hostile forces to enter Syria and threaten Israeli security interests, you will pay a heavy price, Katz said in a statement addressing the Syrian leader. Katz's warning came after Israeli bombardment killed 9 people as troops conducted a raid in southern Syria, the local government and a war monitor stated. Israel's military said it responded to gunfire during an operation targeting and eliminating several fighters in both ground and air attacks. A military spokesperson said weapons in southern Syria posed a threat and vowed to act against them. Meanwhile, Syria's foreign ministry condemned the attacks as a flagrant violation of its sovereignty, citing severe damage, including the destruction of infrastructure of Hamas military airport. State media also reported strikes near a defense research center in Damascus. Israel defended the attacks, saying its forces hit military sites in Hama and T4, as well as infrastructure in Damascus. Moving on now, tensions between the United States and Denmark have escalated since Trump's repeated interest in acquiring Greenland for security reasons. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's visit to Greenland following US Vice President J.D. Vance's provocative trip comes amid concerns over sovereignty. Greenland's new government, led by the centre-right Democrats, seeks independence from Denmark, but not US control. Frederiksen's visit assures Greenlanders who want support from Denmark, not the US. Denmark faces criticism from the US underfunding security in Greenland while maintaining its stance on enhancing US security presence under a 1951 defense agreement. US efforts to control Greenland, including evaluating potential resource exploitation and to the geopolitical tension. Denmark plans a NATO meeting to address these issues, but discussions on Greenland are excluded. Here's what Mette Frederiksen, Danish Prime Minister, had to say.
USA skal ikke overtage Grønland. Grønland er grønlændernes, og USA skal ikke overtage Grønland, og det er selvfølgelig også det budskab, vi kommer til at sige i samlet flok de næste par dage.
Moving to Europe now, where Hungary has announced plans to withdraw from the International Criminal Court as Prime Minister Viktor Orbán hosts Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Budapest. Netanyahu's visit marks his first trip to Europe since the ICC issued an arrest warrant against him over alleged war crimes in Gaza. Netanyahu's visit, kept unusually secretive, includes meetings with Orbán and Hungarian President Tamás Sulyok before his scheduled return to Israel on Sunday. The ICC had previously stated that it had reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu bears criminal responsibility for war crimes, including starvation as a method of warfare, and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. The ICC doesn't have its own law enforcement powers, so it relies on its member states to make the arrests and transfer suspects to The Hague. We are joined by Mark Sofa, former ambassador of Israel to India, to join us in this conversation, located in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark. Mark, what's your initial reaction to this? Hungary and Viktor Orban deciding to withdraw Hungary from the International Criminal Court?
Well, I don't have a point of view on Hungary's decision-making processes and what their decisions are. But of course, on the question of the Netanyahu visit there, which is a wider issue, an issue that affects Israel, we do have opinions here in Israel. They're rather strong, but not on Hungary itself.
So tell me about the implications of obviously Netanyahu, who was technically a fugitive under the International Criminal Court.
Well, I wouldn't use the word fugitive. I think that's going too far. But I will say the following thing. There's an enormous amount of criticism in Israel, enormous, about Netanyahu's visit to Hungary right now, both because of the length. If you're going to Hungary and you want to meet one or two, it's a 3 or 4 hour flight away, you want to meet one or two people, you can come back the same day. So to go for 3 days is an exorbitant amount of time, and much criticism here about that. Also, because Israel is at a boiling point right now, both externally, as you've read on the news just recently, or just now, in Lebanon, in Syria, against the Hamas, hostages still in terrible conditions there in Gaza. And this isn't the time for a lengthy or a period of time abroad. But I must say that even those of us who are very, very against the current government in Israel and against Netanyahu's dealing with issues, the ICC issue is considered by almost consensual in Israel as being a completely political decision. Even those of us who really think that he should go, we should have elections, and we should see what next after the 7th of October. The ICC itself has taken a political position. It hasn't taken a judicial position. There are countless leaders around the world who have done horrendous things to their own people in Turkey, in Iran, in Africa, etc. And nothing has been brought against them. But when it comes to Israel fighting a war, which is a war basically which everybody believes is justified after the horror of the 7th of October, of course it goes to the ICC and they make their decisions. So we don't believe that that's an issue in the Hungary visit. But the other two things certainly are: the length of stay, as I said, and why go away for 3 days when everything is at boiling point here in Israel.
We have seen, obviously, the International Criminal Court execute a warrant when it came to the arrest of Duterte, the former Philippines leader, who some would say executed a brutal crime on drugs. These charges that Netanyahu does face under the International Criminal Court, would you say they are completely unwarranted and politically driven then?
Yes, I would say that. I would also say that they're under appeal, so I think that needs to be seen as well. It's not a final decision. And as I repeat again, Israel right now is extremely divided. Enormous amounts of us and numbers of us are demonstrating in the streets to have new elections, to bring this country back into some sort of visionary purpose, both for Israelis and for Palestinians. But yes, we all agree that the ICC decision was abominable. I don't think there's very few people who think otherwise in Israel. It's under appeal. It's not final, and I would be at all surprised if it was rescinded. So I think that we should look at it in that respect, even as far as internal Israel is concerned, which is how we look at it. So I would say yes, it was a political decision, not a judicial decision, and Israel is held to a different standard than almost any other country in the world. You talk about the Philippines president, but the Iranians who are hanging gays, and Turks who are arresting arbitrarily mayors and clamping down on terrible human rights abuses. And they have nothing, they are passed sort of unambiguously. So I think it is a political decision, yes.
Mark Sofa, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We now move on to some more news. All BIMSTEC leaders are expected to attend this week's summit in Bangkok, but Myanmar chief Min Aung Hlaing participation remains uncertain following an earthquake in the country. A moment of silence has been observed, keeping in mind the victims of the tragedy. The summit, running from April the 2nd to the 4th, brings together leaders from Thailand, Myanmar, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Bhutan. BIMSTEC focuses on multi-sectoral cooperation in the Bay of Bengal region. Thailand, as host, aims to push for deeper collaboration across multiple sectors. The Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, or BIMSTEC, is an international organisation of 7 South Asian and Southeast Asian nations, housing 1.73 billion people and having a combined gross domestic product of $5.2 trillion. NewsX World will bring you to an exclusive coverage of the summit. Stay tuned. We are now joined by our correspondent for NewsX World, Brian Thomas, who is in Thailand right now. Brian, what can you tell me about these leaders gathering in the Thai capital for this annual meeting? Brian, I believe you're muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. This meeting between all the leaders will be very important as well. And even just a while back, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has also visited Hotel Mandarin when we are right now. And then, yes, he was also being received by Thailand Prime Minister as well. And very importantly also, this is a very important meeting between all the leaders. Now, yes, talking about Paitongwan Shinawatra also, who is one of the youngest Prime Ministers of 38 years old. She's also the very daughter of, Thaksin Shinawatra.
Brian, apologies. I just want to quickly interrupt. I just want to ask a quick question. There is obviously speculation that the Myanmar junta chief may join for the summit, giving him some sort of political legitimacy, something he didn't have before. What can you tell me about the speculation in Bangkok over this, just quickly?
Well, see, definitely now junta chief of Myanmar is supposedly planning a visit to Bangkok, and also there has been speculations about his visit to BIMSTEC as well, and most importantly he will also be addressing, and there have been speculation of him visiting Bangkok also to see the earthquake calamity that has even jolted Bangkok and even Myanmar per se. Even though yes, there is no official confirmation as such of the fact that whether he will be attending the summit or not because of the calamities of the situation that remains still very critical there, but definitely there have been speculations that he would be visiting Bangkok very soon, yes.
We are also expecting other leaders, other countries to be involved. What are they hoping to achieve at this summit?
There will be a lot of bilateral talks. You talk about Bhutan, you talk about Nepal, you talk about Thailand, who is the host country, you talk about India itself. There's going to be a lot of bilateral meetings. There's going to be a lot of high-level talks also that will also boost and bolster the relationship between the nations. And this is one of the very important connections that helps all the leaders, all the nations to come together to attend a high-level meeting where they address issues. Even Bangladesh advisor Mohammed Yunus is also here. So there will be a lot of conversations also of many things that needs to be resolved. Bay of Bengal keeping it as the center of attraction as well. These conversations will be very important as well. And many MOUs will also be signed that will be critical for BIMSTEC as well as a summit. Many critical MOUs, many critical high-level delegations, high-level talks will also be taking place at this summit that is scheduled to happen from tomorrow itself, that will go until 6. Yes.
Brian Thomas, thank you very much for joining us. We now move on. Democratic-backed Judge Susan Crawford won a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, dealing a setback to Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who had heavily backed her opponent. The race was the first major electoral test for Trump post-presidency, with Musk investing millions in the Republican challenger. Crawford's win highlights the ongoing battle for judicial control in the state. Meanwhile, Democrats outperformed expectations in Florida special elections, narrowing margins in deep red districts despite GOP victories. Trump's endorsements helped Republicans win, but signs of shifting voter trends could pose challenges in the midterms. Republican Randy Fine won in Daytona Beach by 14 points from a 33-point GOP victory in November, while in Pensacola, Jimmy Patronis won by nearly 15 points compared to a 32-point margin last fall. We are now joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, to discuss this further. Jim, thank you very much for joining us. Susan Crawford's win has been seen as a pushback against Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but do you think this was really more about Wisconsin's own politics?
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me on. It's a great opportunity for me to talk to your listeners about Wisconsin, which is a place that I was born in and lived there for, most of my childhood. This is an important race to try and answer your question. This is an important race because the Supreme Court of Wisconsin has 7 justices, and so Susan Crawford's seat on the Supreme Court is the 7th, and she, being to the left of center, is going to be the deciding vote in several significant court cases which would be pending before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, including issues regarding abortion, as well as the attempts by the Republican Party to reapportion representative seats, which would throw the House of Representatives more completely in the direction of the Republicans. So it's really significant that Susan Crawford was elected.
Jim, why do you think Musk is spending so much money in a local poll in Wisconsin?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. Well, as everyone knows, Elon Musk is the richest person in the world. And he is now essentially a shadow president, an unelected shadow president or co-president with Donald Trump. And he and his unofficial organization, Doge, has been essentially wrecking the federal government agencies. And one of the reasons that he's trying to interfere in Wisconsin politics is because he knows that if he knew that if he were able to sway the race to the Republican candidate, that it would make it easier for the Republican Party to retain the House of Representatives in 2 years' time.
Republicans have just won 2 big House races in Florida. So when you look at that alongside Crawford's win, what does that tell you about how Americans are feeling about Trump and Musk right now?
Those are good questions about the Florida races as well. There were 2 representative races that were in play yesterday. And as you say, both of them went to the Republican candidates. However, the margin of their victories was cut in half. And for Republican political strategists, they must be extremely worried right now because those were very, very safe seats for the Republicans. And they must be thinking that for seats in other parts of the country that were elected on a narrower margin, they'd be at great risk right now.
Jim, this actually ended up being the priciest judicial race in US history, with loads of outside money involved. Are we seeing local court elections becoming too national and too political?
Well, I would certainly agree that there's too much money involved in these local elections as well as in national elections. And this has had very bad effects on American politics ever since the case of Citizens United, was decided to make it unlimited donations. And I think that there needs to be electoral funding reform.
Schimmel conceded the race quite respectively, which felt some different to how some recent losses have played out for the Republicans. Could this be a sign that some on the right are moving away from election denialism?
No. For those people who voted for Trump, the so-called diehard MAGA people, from what I understand, they're still deeply immersed in a culture of election denialism. And the reason for that is because Donald Trump himself is, buys into this big lie that, in fact, he won the 2020 election. So I would say no.
After the result, Musk called it the long con of the left, but pointed out to voter ID laws being passed as a win. What do you make of that response? Is it all about saving face, or part of a bigger strategy?
Well, in terms of voter ID, I think that nearly everyone, nearly all of the voters believe in secure elections. They want to know that their vote will be counted, and that the elections will have integrity and will be honest. And so if voter ID is one method to ensure that this is the case, then I'm sure voters would approve of this. However, to some extent, voter ID can be used as a way of abuse in terms of suppressing votes. And in addition to that, none of this stops what you just referred to as election denialism.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world. Thank you.